Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for this hearing. I want to thank each of you for being here. So when you travel around Florida, people are fed up with the government in a lot of ways. It's all because of fraud. I mean, they're just sick, they sit there, pay their taxes, and they get sick and tired and they read these stories about money being wasted. It's something I had to fight when I was governor of Florida, and I fought about it since I've been up here. Estimates show that up to 10%, it's probably way more than that, of federal spending is on fraud, waste, and abuse. Just in Minnesota, with the recent revelations, the administration estimates at least $19 billion in fraud, and it's probably more than that. So I think everybody that pays their taxes, should be furious about this. We're supposed to be the stewards of taxpayer dollars. It's a betrayal of the American taxpayer by the people responsible for overseeing those programs and their taxpayer dollars. I agree with you. We ought to do audits. I ran public companies. I ran private companies. Guess what? They're all audited. We had outside groups that audited how we did to make sure, and they gave us recommendations how we could improve every year. It's also a betrayal for the families who the funding was intended to actually help, who might be left without a safety net because of these fraudsters, because the federal government's been so easy to steal money from. I'm introducing my SNAP Data Transparency and Oversight Act this week. It's going to hold states accountable from sheltering fraudsters by requiring, it's real simple, requiring states receiving SNAP funding to provide recipient data to the USDA when requested. Pretty basic. Federal government puts the money up, we ought to get the data. I think this bill just is a start. We need to figure out exactly how the fraud occurred, where every single tax dollar is going, why, and we got to hold people accountable. I remember when I became governor of Florida in January 2011, people were telling me that they knew there was fraud in the unemployment program and they weren't going after the people that they knew were committing fraud. Like, how is that? How are you being a fiduciary to the taxpayer if you know there's fraud and you're not holding people accountable? So I think we've got to hold the people of Minnesota accountable, California, all across the country. So, Senator, as a member of the Minnesota Senate, you have experience with fraud prevention and detection in programs like unemployment insurance, Medicaid, disaster relief, and others. It's clear fraud has become a systemic problem for the Walz administration. I was governor of Florida. It's hard to believe that as a governor of the state, he had no idea it was handing out money to such blatant scammers, and that billions of dollars could be stolen continuously, not just once, over and over, with what looks like zero accountability. So since the scandal has been unveiled, what has the Minnesota government, what has the governor, the Minnesota government done actually, what have they done to halt the fraudulent payments?
Well, thank you. The governor has done very little. I think he's promoted and created a czar, a fraud czar, and under the Department of Public Safety, and there was just a recent article that came out, and he's done nothing since that started. He has put a hold on those 14 of the suspected programs which receive Medicaid funding. And some of those Medicaid funding programs, like housing support services and autism, were based on the federal investigators in Minnesota, have deemed that 90% of that was entirely fraud. Each of those programs, just those two programs, are about $800 million of taxpayer dollars that are being stolen. And so they have taken a little action. Unfortunately, they're so horribly ineffective that even the good providers are caught up in there, and they're willing to open their kimono. All good providers are willing to open their kimono and be audited. They're not even able to do that. And when you talk about the level of fraud, we all agree it touches the pocketbook, but it's stealing from the most needy in the state and in the country. And we're only talking about the stuff that rises to the level that we'd be criminally prosecuted, not that which is wasted by swimming through the lane of government ineffectiveness. That's exponentially greater than what we're talking about here today. So we have a big challenge to solve. One of the pieces that I would argue would be, I think the advice was good that you've heard so far, but in Minnesota, between 1 and 3 elements of eligibility when you're looking or applying for benefits, it's a county-based system in Minnesota, is proven based on a self-attestation. I think our federal government should eliminate self-attestations.
So has Governor Walz, or the Attorney General, has any company, any person been prosecuted?
There have been not very few based on our Attorney General and fraud that's discovered by our state agencies. Almost exclusively everything you see in the headlines today is because of our federal government came in under the Feeding Our Future program, the $500 million which has only had about $330 million charged and prosecuted. I think almost 100 charged and some 60 have been convicted. That is just the beginning of the discovery and all of those other Medicaid programs and their financial discovery. They've discovered all of the other fraud and the tentacles because it's coming from the very same providers.
So in your state, are the taxpayers okay with fraud?
I think you've seen Governor Walz is no longer running for his, re-election. They're upset, but they're just learning about it. When Governor Walz pranced on the stage in the presidential election is when Minnesotans started to realize, or not realize, but when our local media was kind of forced to cover the actions that have actually taken place under his administration.
So no fraud is the victimless crime. At the end of the day, it's hardworking American taxpayers in your state, Minnesota taxpayers paying their local taxes, their state taxes, and their federal taxes, who suffer from fraudulent activity. How have legitimate providers and families in Minnesota seen reduced services, delayed payments, and title rules that make it harder for honest people to get help because of this fraud?
Yeah, we've got stories all over the state of good providers that are providing critical services, and the delays, even in a legitimate autism service provider was just highlighted this week, $250,000 a week in payroll, and they've delayed it for 90 days, payments for 90 days, and they only plan to roll it out in a limited environment. Many of the critical services and providers that actually are doing the work may go under and leave a huge portion of our population unserved.
Mr. Talco, as we know, a simple visit to these fraudulent businesses in Minnesota revealed they are not real businesses. Can you explain how weak identity verification and self-certification systems like the ones we've seen in Minnesota and the Senator just talked about are a common vulnerability that criminals abuse across unemployment insurance, SBA loans, SNAP, Medicaid, and other major federal programs?
This happens in all 50 states, Senator, and it starts with the Secretary of State and how the businesses are registered. You can go on to any of your state web portals, enter in any name you want for a business. As long as it doesn't impact a copyright, it's set up. And what the criminals do is they take those shell companies and then they create fake employees, they create fake services, and they deliver fake services, yet they're stealing real taxpayer dollars.
All right, thank you.